Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Stellium Astrology podcast. I'm your host, Stephanie James, and I'm the founder of stelliumastrology.com, and I work for the London School of Astrology as a tutor. I do occasional classes for the LSA, and I've also written horoscopes for Elle magazine, as well as contributed articles and horoscopes for various publications. And today I decided to record an episode about stelliums, or stellia, as they're kind of traditionally known, as a sort of plural, I guess. So I have already written a blog post about this, which is kind of a popular post on my website. I don't know why it took me so long to write it. I think I'm just one of those amazing procrastinators, which is probably why I've got a podcast called the Stellium Astrology Podcast, and it's taken me over a year to actually address the subject of what a stellium is as well. So maybe I'm a little bit backwards about these things, who knows, but I thought it was high time that I actually discussed what a stellium is in astrology. So it really is one of those things that varies depending on whoever you speak to. So there are groups on Facebook where people talk about their stelliums. There is one group that I am a member of as well, called the Capricorn Stellium group. I don't have a Capricorn stellium, but I have an Aquarius stellium. But it is very obvious to me that there are a lot of different opinions about what constitutes a stellium and what doesn't. And I did offend somebody on that group the other day by accident by saying that technically what they have isn't considered a stellium. It's still, in my opinion, a strong emphasis, but they got offended because they were like, it is a stellium, and loads of people jumped on it, and I was like, well, I'm just talking about what they say in textbooks and stuff like that. I'm not going by my personal opinion, so don't bite my head off. But either way, yeah, I thought I would just address this because I have the Stellium Astrology podcast, and I do have a few questions from a few people about, what is a stellium, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, as a general rule, a stellium is usually inclusive of either a transpersonal planet or a social planet. So, either Jupiter and Saturn or Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. That's what some people say. Gosh, there's so many different opinions about this. However, there are a lot of people who think that, it's basically, some people say it's 3 planets or more, and some people say it has to be 4 planets or more. Some people don't think it's a stellium if it's just like, say, the Capricorn stellium generation with the Uranus Neptune conjunction and with Saturn in there too. They don't really consider that to be much of a stellium because it's generational, and I can understand that because it's not very personalised. However, some people say that they think that if you had Sun and Venus and Mercury, that's a stellium too, which I have been told that because the Sun and Mercury are always so close together. I think Mercury is never more than 28 degrees away from the Sun, and Venus is never more than 45 degrees away from the Sun. That the likelihood of those 3 planets, or the luminary, the solar luminary, the primary luminary, and Mercury and Venus being in the same sign is highly, highly likely. So it's very, very personal. Everybody, it's funny because it's one of those labels that when people hear it and go, oh, a stellium, wow, what does that mean? And then you look it up and then you start reading about it and you think, oh yes, that I've got a stellium. It really depends, and I'm not going to be somebody who tells somebody no, they definitely don't, or yes, they definitely do. Definitely not in the Capricorn stellium group, because that really upset a lot of people. I think one person said, my daughter has Sun, Mercury and Venus all in one sign. Is this a stellium? And I kind of said, well, technically no, just based on what textbooks say. But so many people were like, what are you talking about? Of course it's a stellium. And I'm like, oh, okay. I think people get really hung up on labels sometimes with this sort of thing. So it's a bit difficult because it's funny because people really identify with their birth charts, and when they get a label and they like it and they start researching it, they really identify with it. It can be really hard for them to kind of separate themselves from it. And I think that the right thing to do is to kind of come from or rather, this is so Aquarian of me, and I do have all of my personal planets in Aquarius, but come from a bit of a removed perspective and try not to hang on to the identity of what the label could mean. So yeah, some people say that a stellium has to be all of the personal planets, and the personal planets are Mercury, Venus, and Mars, and they have to be in the same sign, basically. So that's what I have. I have all of my personal planets in Aquarius. So technically, I only have 3 planets in Aquarius, and my midheaven's there too. But it's not. I don't think of my stellium as being a mega stellium because it's only 3 planets, and but they're all my personal planets. Which obviously, if you think about the episodes that I recorded on the personal planets and the social planets and the transpersonal planets, you have, they all feel very different in your chart. The personal planets are called the personal planets because they move much faster, and because they move much faster, their placement in various signs are going to have a much more personal interplay into your chart. Whereas the slower moving ones that are, like Jupiter and Saturn, are going to definitely be, the social planets. They're much more connected to your social group, your class at school, maybe even your, the people that were above and below you in university or school or whatever. So you kind of got that kind of, there's a social connection that you have with those people. You probably all, I was thinking about it the other day, when you're texting, they said that millennials find it really hard not to stick a smiley face or, use emojis, whereas the generation Z, who is after the millennials, tend to write lol, but instead of LOL, they'll put lol, and don't usually use too much of the emoji stuff. So it's funny because even things down to like, communicating with your friends, your peer group, your social group, even little things like that. And, the kind of music trends, the fashion trends and things like that can be quite down to sort of even those kind of things. And when you then get to the transpersonal planets, so Uranus, Neptune or Pluto, you are then dealing with much slower moving planets, which if you happen to be born during a time, for example, any babies born sort of over the past, so let's think, since 2017, any babies born from 2017 up until last year will have had Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn, and then any babies born during I think 2019 to 2020 would have Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto. So automatically they kind of qualify for having a stellium. But actually, how personalised is that to them? Unless they were maybe born in January, so they've got a Capricorn sun as well, and likelihood is that Mercury and Venus would be nearby, or they could have been born when Mars was hanging around nearby. There's different ways that this feeds. There's different ways that these stelliums work, but technically, it's about 3 planets in a sign, and they don't have to be in conjunction. They don't have to be really tight together. And this is an episode which I have kind of lumped in with the kind of the aspects discussion, because a conjunction is obviously included as an aspect in the natal chart. So aspect patterns, as far as aspect patterns are concerned, you have got the the stellium, which if you've got planets sitting at the same degree, more than 2 sitting at the same degree or within orb of each other, then that's considered to be quite a powerful conjunction and would be a stellium. So yeah, I mean, it does depend on who you speak to. Some people really are fussy about it and some people aren't. I know that people really hang on to, they really get stuck with these kind of identity things when it comes to defining a stellium. And I have also noticed that when you're kind of newer to astrology, and I'm guilty of this myself, you kind of put all the asteroids in and everything and have a look at all these really, really heavily populated areas of your chart. And you kind of, want to see like where's the heaviest emphasis, what does it all mean. I personally wouldn't be including anything other than planets. And I mean, yes, I suppose Chiron would be included because Chiron is an asteroid, but I don't generally include other asteroids in a stellium. Some people might. I definitely don't include Lilith in a stellium. Um, she's it's an interesting. Lilith is interesting. I'll have to do an episode on Lilith for you. But she's not a physical point. There's not. I mean, there are different Liliths, by the way. There are different Liliths, and there is a physical Lilith asteroid. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Black Moon Lilith, which is the most commonly referred to point. And yeah, it's not a specific. I wouldn't necessarily include that in a stellium myself personally. But obviously, like I said, this isn't a science. This is a craft. This is an art, and you don't necessarily. Everybody interprets the chart differently. Everybody interprets it differently, and by saying, that I don't include these points of the chart doesn't mean that I'm the end of the discussion about this. I'm the authority on this. Yes, I've done a lot of work. Yes, I've studied stelliums for a long time, and yes, I'm very interested in them and have been ever since I have first heard the word stellium. But it doesn't mean that there aren't going to be new discoveries, or I might change my mind in the future, like every good Gemini rising can and should. The more I work with other minor asteroids and other points, maybe I might find that there is some serious considerations to be made here. I think Lilith is important in the chart, but I don't know whether she really has much sway over a stellium. I do think she's important if you have got a conjunction with Lilith of your sun, maybe, of your moon, if she plays into your chart in quite a major way. But as far as a stellium's concerned, especially if it was like a generational one, I would say probably that's definitely not going to be too much of a major thing for you. So I do, like I said, kind of assess each case on its own merit, because I do feel like I've put it in my article as well, each individual is as unique as their fingerprint, and I do think that every chart's different, every person's different. There's different people who are more sensitive to wider orbs. If you had like a watery, maybe somebody with Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces in conjunction with their sun, I think they're going to be much more sensitive to things than maybe somebody who's got Sun, Saturn in Taurus, for example, who's going to be very practical, realistic, and boundaried, and there's so many things that can affect the outcome of the interpretation and the person who you're speaking to. So yeah, just to refer to some sources here that I found. Alan Oken, he says that a stellium should involve no less than 4 planets, which is Oken page 435. Julia and Derek Parker defines a stellium as a group of planets, 3 or more, in one sign or house. And other sources prefer to remain more ambiguous about the exact number of planets involved. For example, Celeste Teal simply defines it as a group of several planets in one sign or house. Generally, I would go with 3 or more, personally. I just would. And if we're going to go with the sign or the house thing, that might even be a whole different episode. But just to touch on it, I think that if you've got 3 or more planets in one house, I think it's very much dependent on the type of house system that you're using. If you use a number of different house systems and you seem to have that collection of planets in one house, no matter which house system you're looking at, then I think that that's quite important. But if you had if you were using equal house, and then you changed to whole sign, and your stellium spanned over 2 different houses, but didn't seem to have much of a relationship, I would say that probably doesn't feel quite right. If you were using Placidus or Regiomontanus or the Co house system, again, there's many different house systems, and if just so you're aware, for my patrons, they are going to have an explanation of house systems from Wade Caves as part of their bonus content. But yeah, there are a number of different house systems which change the size of the houses, which mean that sometimes there are going to be more planets incorporated and sometimes they're going to be less. If I use Placidus on my own chart, I have a stellium in my 6th house, which I can really identify with actually. But my stellium isn't in one sign in the 6th house. It goes from Libra to Sagittarius. Whereas in equal house system, I definitely have a stellium in my 8th house. And I also have a stellium in Aquarius because I have my sun. Actually, this is what I've got in my 8th house in equal, I believe. I might have to actually look at my chart in a minute. It's been so long. I have my sun. I do have Lilith there in conjunction with my sun. And then I have Mercury, Venus, midheaven and Mars. So Mercury, Venus, midheaven and Mars all in Aquarius, and Lilith and my sun in Capricorn. So, you know, I don't actually include my sun in having a stellium, but you know, it's just one of those things, whereas you can look at your chart in different ways and find what you want to find if you want to, changing your house system. So the house system that you use, or the house that the stellium sits in, is important, don't get me wrong. And a stellium can straddle 2 houses as well. Again, that's important. There is no stellium that isn't important in the chart. It's just that if you are looking for a stellium and you're trying to pull something together to make it look like you've got a stellium, but there doesn't seem to be much relationship with the planets, it might be that you don't. But generally speaking, it's quite easy to find a stellium in your natal chart. It's very easy to see one because you can just see a cluster of planets sitting there. In my article that I've shared, I have in my blog post that I've written for this, I've used a chart. I know about 3 people with this chart, and basically, yeah, they've got Sun and Uranus in Sagittarius, late Sagittarius. Oh, in fact, Sun at late Sag, and then Uranus, Saturn, Mercury, and Neptune all in Capricorn. Now, not all of these planets are at the exact same degree. There are some, you know, there's some orb between some of them, but it is a very heavily weighted area of the chart. It's hard not to notice all of these planets all clustered together. And when you actually have a look at the degrees, you've got Sun at 25 Sag, and then Uranus at 0 Capricorn, Saturn at 3 Capricorn, Mercury at 4 Capricorn, and then Neptune at 9. And then if you want to, you could also say, well, look, the midheaven's up there at 23 as well. So it's quite a lot of stuff going on in Capricorn. And from the looks of it in this chart that I'm looking at, it's an 8th house stellium, but it kind of, I think it sort of shifts sort of between 8th and 9th, depending. I'm not sure which house system this is, but you know, it's the sign, generally speaking, with a stellium, they say isn't as important as the house placement when you have a stellium. So the house placement is going to be more obvious and tell you about how the stellium will play out in which area of life, what kind of themes you're going to see. I still think that the sign is important. I still think it's really important to look at, you know, for anybody with the Capricorn stellium, they've been activated over the past few years. So the Capricorn stellium I'm referring to is people generally born in the 90s, around sort of 1991, I think between 91 and 1993 for sure. I'm trying to think when Saturn moved out and started doing his thing. But there's lots of people born sort of in the 90s who've got some kind of variation of a Capricorn stellium, and they've had most notably Uranus and Neptune together in their chart. And people born during this period have been activated over the past few years with Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto all moving through Capricorn. And they've all had their Saturn returns. Most of them had their Saturn returns or are due to have their Saturn returns kind of around now, with Saturn having gone through Capricorn and now in Aquarius. So these people are having, a very Saturnian time as it is, in Saturn-ruled signs of Capricorn and Aquarius. And yeah, I think that a lot of these people have a lot of strong moral, ethical codes. They are usually, they're quite serious people, whether they realise it or not. They all seem to have their head screwed on quite well. I'm not saying, everybody is going to have this, because there's a lot of people with Neptune in Capricorn from that period of time who don't really identify with Capricorn at all, because Neptune completely dissolves that Capricorn essence. And Uranus is his very nature is to kind of break and reject the systems of Capricorn. So there's a very rebellious, spiritual kind of connection there with this generation. And then you've got this kind of like ethical thing, breaking traditions, breaking the way things have always been done. So this generation is really interesting, because they're kind of here to fight the system, or maybe not fight the system, but reject the system, change the system in some way. So, things, not every single person's going to have their own personal mission feeding into this. This is, like I said, a generational thing. However, especially if you do have your sun or your Mercury, or some of your personal planets there, maybe your moon there, tying in with it all, you're going to have a much more personal experience with this kind of huge generational shift that really was instigated in the 90s. So that's just one kind of stellium. There's going to be a lot of people born in the 60s who have the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, and then like Keanu Reeves. I've written about Keanu Reeves, and he's got I'm trying to think now what he's got. I know he's got a Cancer moon with a couple of planets in Cancer, that kind of, 3 planets in Cancer. So he's got a stellium in Cancer technically, and then he's got his, I think he's a Sun Virgo with Uranus and Pluto in his chart rising as well. So he's got that generational Uranus Pluto conjunction, which so many people have, because they're all born during this period of time when these slow moving planets were together. So yes, you can see stelliums that form over time. Like I said, I've got my Aquarius stellium with all my personal planets. If I use Placidus house system, then I've got a stellium going from 29 Libra up to, gosh, I could even include I suppose, no, I won't. But yeah, in my 6th house, it goes from 29 Libra up to 17 Sagittarius. Had to think about that. And includes Saturn, Pluto, my moon, Jupiter, and Uranus. So 5 planets all in the 6th house. And I can really identify with that, I have to say. I really, really, really do. Amy Winehouse had a similar stellium, which, depending on the house system you use, you could say was, I think, about her 6th house as well. And I would say she's a classic example of somebody with a lot of complicated planets in the 6th house. So yeah, it's quite interesting to look at stelliums and try and unpick them. Hopefully you kind of understand I hope I haven't made you more confused. I'm going to record a few other episodes as well about this. But yeah, even in my chart, I've got Jupiter, Uranus, and Neptune in Sagittarius. They're all sort of, well, Jupiter and Uranus are quite close together, and Neptune's a bit further away. But again, technically, they're all in the same sign, so you could say that's a stellium. I never really even noticed that until a little while ago, but that's a bit more generational for me, a bit more social. And yeah, you've got, there's lots of different ways of looking at the chart, but generally, if you think you've got a stellium, if you feel like you've got a stellium, if you think that there's one area of your life that's really emphasized, which for me is Aquarius, because of all of my personal planets in Aquarius, there's a lot of emphasis in that area of my life, and I am super Aquarian, I would say, quite an Aquarian type. And I also have that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction as well, which Jupiter kind of blows stuff out of proportion, so it makes my Uranian aspect of my personality a lot more Uranian, I guess, a lot more Aquarian. I definitely also feel quite well versed in areas of the 8th house as well, So hopefully this has helped to kind of give you an idea of, what a stellium actually is. And yeah, I'll record a few more episodes just on this area, just because it's kind of essential, really, isn't it, to understand seeing as the podcast is called the Stellium Astrology Podcast. And I do really want people to find out, because they are hard to understand. They are really hard to unpick because so many planets sitting so close together. Oh my gosh, I've got a cat in here. She's just broken in. What are you doing? Now the door's closed behind her, she's going to freak out. Lana, what's the matter? She hears my voice coming from behind a closed door and she freaks out. Hello, you come to tell everybody you've got a stellium? Lana, I got Lana from the rescue centre. I can't remember what the date was when I got her, but she was delivered to the rescue centre on my birthday. So there seems to be some kind of synastry there. And I'm so curious to know. I wish I could know more about Lana's chart, but because she's a rescue cat, I don't know. But anyway, yes, back to stelliums. You know, if you are, if you're not sure, you can always send me an email, stephanie@stelliumastrology.com, and Stephanie is spelled Stefanie. And I will do my best at some point to cast your chart, have a little look and tell you what I think. And don't worry about it. I'm not going to be mean. I'm never mean to people. I have a Mercury-Venus conjunction. I'm always lovely. I'm like the sweetest. Actually, somebody said to me the other day, I think it was Felicia on Instagram, said I was very sweet for a Capricorn. And I took that as a compliment. I'm guessing a lot of Capricorns are kind of mean, maybe. A bit cold perhaps, but I have that lovely warming Venus who makes me much more approachable. So yeah, so that's it. So hopefully this has helped you to kind of understand really that a stellium is, you know, kind of what constitutes as a stellium, and kind of what they do in your chart. So yeah, get in touch with me if you'd like to find out more about yourself. I might have mentioned this already before. If you're thinking about having a reading with me, I would say definitely put your name down on the readings waiting list, which is on the readings tab on my website, just because that is starting to fill up. So the sooner you put your name down, you know, the sooner you'll get seen, because I will be offering people appointments based on the order in which they came to me inquiring about a reading through my form. So yeah, definitely, if you're interested in having a reading, put your name down for it sooner rather than later. If you're enjoying the podcast, please do write a review. Oh, Lana, hi. She's here. She's right up in my face. Hello, baby. Yeah, leave me a review on iTunes, or I know you can't on Spotify, or you can just send me a message on Instagram. I love receiving the love. And I think that's it. Yeah, check me out on YouTube. I am putting out, you know, some enhanced podcast episodes, not loads, but, you know, some here and there. And I've relaunched the podcast over there as well. So I guess that kind of technically makes me a YouTuber. Anyway, I'm going to go, you guys, and I shall do a few more stellium episodes for you, and hopefully you'll find them useful. Take care.